Hello and welcome to Hash Rate. My name is Mark Jeffrey. Today our guest is Clay Kilgo of the Fantom Unchained podcast. But before we begin, I want to give a shout out to our partner, crypto exchange MEXC. Get up to $4,100 when you sign up using my link in the show notes on YouTube. MEXC has over 1,500 coins, and they have all the cool 3x coins, which you can use even in the United States, which a lot of exchanges won't let you use those. MEXC will. I've been using the site for months now, and I love it. Check it out, MEXC. So hello, Clay, and welcome to Hash Rate.
Mark, thanks for having me, man. I was excited to be here.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on short notice. So let's dive right in. So today we're here to talk about the state of Fantom the blockchain. So let's first set the stage. Remember, there's a lot of people who watch this who don't necessarily, live in this world and breathe it like we do. So first of all, what is Fantom? Tell us what Fantom is.
Yeah, sure. So Fantom is a EVM compatible layer 1 blockchain. It utilizes proof of stake, which a lot of people are familiar with kind of what's going on with Ethereum coming over to proof of stake. But their model is called Lachesis, and so it's a little bit different. So on Ethereum, basically synchronous processing of transactions happens across all the nodes symmetrically. So it's like stacking transactions, right?
Yeah.
On the Fantom side, sort of the vision is this processing simultaneously. So nodes store blocks of transactions ordered by when they come in, the time.
Yeah.
And then validators have the freedom to process those at different times. So basically, what you finally get is Lachesis can output things immediately. So there's no need to wait for block confirmations. They're confirmed in like 1 or 2 seconds.
Okay, so let's unpack that a little bit here, because remember, there's a lot of people that didn't understand some of that. So first of all, you said Fantom is an EVM compatible blockchain. So what that means is, for those of you who don't know, is that Fantom, anything that runs on Ethereum can run on Fantom. So if you have like a smart contract you've written on Ethereum, you just cut and paste it on Fantom, and boom, it works right away. And also, if you have a wallet on Ethereum, you just tune your wallet to Fantom instead of Ethereum, and boom, your wallet works right away immediately. So just like, for those of you who are old like me and remember 380 or x86 compatibility, whatever would run on a Compact would run on an IBM, which would run on a gateway. Same thing, just with blockchains. Now, you talked about Lachesis, right? And we immediately got into some technical stuff there. Bottom line is that Fantom is using new techniques. It is a full rewrite of Ethereum. It's not a clone. They actually rewrote it from scratch with a new engine, built completely from scratch, which they rethought. And the goal is to create hyper scalability and hyper speed, right? So that's am I correct? That's my understanding.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the consensus algorithm is really what makes the difference. It's almost like you imagine getting on a subway car and you've got people coming on one by one. Those are transactions getting confirmed, or getting on with a group of people and then confirming them sort of asynchronously. So the result is literally 1 second time to finality. So transactions are processed in 1 second. Super cheap gas fees. I mean, as far as usability is concerned, it's one of the best experiences I've ever had in blockchain. And it's just it's really a dream to use. It's got a lot of technical advantages, I think, compared to a lot of its competitors.
So pretty much, Fantom has today what Ethereum is attempting to get to with the 5 or so steps of the merge. They have the merge, the splurge, the flurge. I don't remember what they all are, but pretty much there's 5 steps, right? Beginning with the first one in I think it's September. But it's like a 1.5-year process. And when they're done with that 1.5-year process, they will be at where Fantom already is today, more or less. Is that correct in your view?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the goal for sure.
So we know that there are some other EVM-compatible blockchains or Ethereum-compatible blockchains. Most of those are just clones of Ethereum with a few tweaks. So Binance, BNB, Binance Smart Chain, being one of the bigger ones, right? So and they basically achieve very fast speed, very low transaction fees by highly centralizing their chain, right? It's a bunch of computers in CZ's basement, bottom line, right? When you get down to it, right? Whereas Fantom is achieving their new efficiencies and still remaining largely decentralized. Yes, no?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's 73 validators now. So
Yep.
people would argue, that's not as decentralized as they'd like to see. I think it's a million Fantom to actually run a validator, so it's a little expensive to actually buy one. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, I think we see these all these EVM chains. They're all facing the same problem at the end of the day, right? They should be trying to solve the same problem. But I think Fantom is one of the only ones that's actually working to solve that, and with security first, with decentralization, maintaining all of the advantages of what blockchain offers, and a lot of people are kind of cutting corners. And I'm sure we're going to get into some of the advancements on the FVM and things like that. But yeah, you nailed it.
Yeah, so Fantom is proof of stake. Just we haven't said that yet. So It is not proof of work. It is proof of stake. You just brought up what the stake is. It's a million Fantom. You have to have a million Fantom staked in order to run a validator. And so if Fantom right now is at around, I think it's like 30 cents last time I looked, something like that. Let's just say it's 30 cents for a round number. So that would mean that I would need 300K worth of Fantom, if I'm doing my math right, in order to run a validator. Bottom line. So it is a little expensive.
Yeah. We should check. I think they were talking about lowering that requirement. And so, but yeah, that math would be correct. It would be 300K at today's prices.
Good. I'm glad I could do math in my head because it's not always true. So, okay. So now let's just compare it to AVAX for a moment, Avalanche, and I guess what else? I guess Avalanche is probably the other big one I'd compare it to. So Avalanche is mostly a fork of Ethereum in comparison. They didn't rewrite everything from scratch, I don't believe. But they do have subnets, so they did rewrite some of it, right? So how would you compare the technology of Fantom to Avalanche?
I mean, I think that they're going about it in two different ways, right? So we'll get into sort of what the Fantom virtual machine is probably later, but I think the vision for Fantom is around vertical scaling. So advancing past the bottlenecks that the EVM currently has across. So all chains that have the EVM obviously all have the same bottlenecks, right? And so the vision of Fantom is to change those bottlenecks, fix them, improve speed and everything about the blockchain by actually advancing the tech and building vertical scaling out that way. So becoming sort of the fastest and the most reliable blockchain that enhances the limitations of the EVM. Whereas AVAX is horizontally scaling, right? They're rolling out subnets where you've got your own projects that launch on horizontally across all these subnets, which roll up to the main chain. And so it's really just two different ways to tackle the problem. And I think it's two different fundamental sort of visions of what you want your blockchain to be. And I guess time will tell as to whose vision ultimately wins. Right.
Well, we just had Celestia on this show a couple of shows ago. I think it was my show number 2 of hash rate. And they are taking the horizontal scaling another step beyond what Avalanche has done. So I would describe them as hyper horizontal. And to them, the great Satan is the monolithic blockchain, which Fantom is saying, yeah, we are monolithic, but we think there are new efficiencies to be gained within that monolithic architecture. I know one that I heard that I was fairly impressed with that I think they're either close to achieving or have already achieved, and that is the smart contracts. As the number of smart contracts increases on Ethereum, the space required to hold them grows exponentially. So basically the blockchain slows down exponentially as the space grows. So Fantom segmented out the storage of the smart contracts, or will soon. I forget which it is. But basically that enhancement should give like sort of a 10x boost, something like that, to Fantom's performance just right there. And that's before the FVM, which we're not going to talk about yet, the Fantom virtual machine. That is the hardcore magic, which is in the future. We'll save that till later on in the podcast. But just know that is a thing that's coming, and that is the big nuke that Fantom is sort of holding back. But even today, Fantom is processing more transactions than Ethereum on many days. So and it's also attracted this huge DeFi ecosystem. So it seems to me, at least so far, and maybe a little less so in the beginning of 2022, which we're going to get into in a second. But Fantom for about a year there had a reputation as being the best chain for new DeFi things to be born on. Fantom First was something we all heard a lot. So the punk rock the CBGB of blockchains, if you will. Like all the new bands were playing there first, right?
Yep.
Would you agree with that?
I would. I mean, if you look at sort of the performance historically, into 2021 and the beginning of 2022, transactions per day, as you mentioned, I think they're averaging about 800,000, anywhere to 1.3 million or so. That's on par with Ethereum on a daily basis in terms of transactions. I think it's grown like 3.1x year over year in terms of the amount of transactions the chain is handling. There's 3.6 million unique users. And there's 254 protocols on the chain, already. So like if you look at sort of the, Ethereum, Binance, and Polygon, I think they're the only three that actually have more protocols, on their chain. So a ton of building, a ton of growth. And I hear all the time, with Fantom Alerts, obviously we have, Beavis on, and there's a lot of devs we bring on, and we're talking to projects all the time. But they all say the same thing, which is it's a great place to build. They can deploy everything very cheaply. Yeah, it's like compared to building on Ethereum, where you got to spend $20,000 to deploy something. You can do it for fractions of that on Fantom. So it's a really good place to build. It's also a great place to deploy strategies because it's so cheap. If you want to auto compound rewards or like harvest rewards, 8 times a day, you can do that because it's literally the gas fees are like sub 1 cent at this point. It's almost free to use. So it's an amazing place to build. It's incredibly cheap. And I think what comes out of all of that is this like sort of this desire to experiment, where you can actually be in a place to experiment. And you see a ton of protocols building things, and I think we'll probably get into some of the protocols. But I always go back to boosted pools with Beethoven, like just for them to be able to roll out that type of advanced strategy and actually experiment and get it done really fast. It's just Balancer wasn't doing it on Ethereum. It's expensive, it's gas intensive, and so Fantom it really opens the door to a lot of unique opportunities as protocols and builders.
Yeah. So you said something interesting. So you said you can auto compound on Fantom 8 times a day. So if you tried to do that on Ethereum, gas fees are, I haven't looked lately, but they've been anywhere from $30 per transaction. I've seen it as high as $800 per transaction, kind of depending on the day and who's trying to mint what NFTs that day. You try to auto compound on that day, that's 800 times 8, right?
Right.
So right. Just that's the worst case. The best case is it's $30, maybe $10 times 8. So I haven't really seen it lower than $10 recently. So huge difference if it's sub pennies on Fantom. That's less than 8 cents. Right. So fantastic.
It definitely is. It definitely is. I mean, I think that, you look at things like Reaper Farm, which is an auto compounding yield farm on, it started on Fantom. It's now deploying other places, but, they just rolled out multi-strategy vaults. So single staked assets. So Bitcoin, Ethereum, Wrap, Fantom, you can single stake them, and they apply up to 20 different strategies at one time to maximize the return. And they can do that because they can auto compound and harvest those rewards so frequently with their bots whenever it's profitable to do so. And so they're rolling out some serious innovation with single asset vaults, and basically it's just another great example of why they're really steps ahead of some other kind of competitors in the same space.
Yeah, so let me actually just address that really quickly because I know what you're saying, but I want to make sure everybody's following along.
Sure.
If they're playing the home game of the Fantom state of things. So with something like Reaper Farm, you said that they have strategies. So in DeFi, it's common for people to deposit tokens into one vault. Sometimes it's LP tokens. That you get from providing liquidity to an exchange, that requires you to deposit 2 tokens, equal amounts of each. So, Ethereum and USDC, or Wrap Bitcoin and Tether, whatever the pair is that you're providing liquidity for, you have to provide both. And then you take the token that's sort of like your coat check for providing the liquidity. You then provide that to Reaper, and then Reaper is able to redeposit that somewhere else or auto compound it. Basically take your winnings from providing liquidity and split that again into the pair that you provided, say Tether and Wi-Fi, and put that back into the liquidity and get even more staking rewards for doing that. And basically, there are a number of very complex ways in which you can take these claim tokens and restake them to get even more rewards, sometimes nesting them 4, 5, 6, 7 layers deep. And doing all that yourself and doing all the auto compounding yourself, very tedious. And on Ethereum, extremely expensive. But if you let Reaper Farm manage that for you, it's just you set it and forget it. You throw your token. Sometimes you don't need both tokens. You can just, you said single-sided. So a lot of, like, that's a pain in the ass doing 2 tokens. What if I just have 1 token and it's just sitting in my ledger? I want it to get rewards if I can, right? So might as well give it to Reaper Farm. They'll go out and get those rewards for you. So make sense?
That's you nailed it. I mean, I think the APRs. I was looking this morning. I mean, for Wrap BTC, I think it's like 21%. So I mean, that's pretty amazing.
Right, that is incredible, right? You're basically getting 21% APY on your Bitcoin. If you convert it to Wrap Bitcoin, and compare that to Celsius back in the day, even when they were being insane, right? It was like, I think it was like 8 to 12%. 12% was kind of the high end of it from what I remember. Yeah. And they were supposedly just being crazy with it, right? So Reaper is ostensibly, you can see what they're doing, right? Because you can actually go and inspect. Are the strategies actually publicly inspectable or not? I don't remember.
I'm not sure if they're like fully, like if you could actually like kind of, go layers deeper and see what they're doing behind the scenes. I'm not sure if they do that or not.
Okay. But we know that the Byte Masons, the Byte Masons are the people behind Reaper Farm. Know them, some of them anyway, personally. And they're extremely smart. I've watched them. I've heard them talk. I've watched your show. I've heard Justin Bibas speak. And he is clearly a very, very smart dude. And, game recognizes game. So all the people around him, I'm assuming, are just as smart. And and they're doing very clever things. And they're doing it on Fantom First anyway. So you'd also mentioned BeethovenX. Which is and that's only something I've actually personally gotten into recently. They have a Beats token, which I recently purchased within the last month or so, because I think it's undervalued. I think what they're doing is potentially extremely much larger. I just think they're underestimated, and they're smarter than people are giving them credit for. So it's a clone of Balancer. Tell us a little bit about BeethovenX.
Yeah, so it was the first friendly fork of Balancer. So by friendly, I mean Balancer actually sort of signed off. The community said, we approve this fork. We're behind it. We support it, which means that they're very close in development with that team. So close that they've actually launched on Optimism as an additional layer of their partnership, where they took the Beethoven UI, moved it over to Optimism. So now they're on Fantom and Optimism, but they are a Balancer V2 AMM, and they do a lot of really unique things. They've got weighted pools. So most of the time when you provide liquidity, you've got, like you said, 2 tokens, right? Like Fantom and USDC, and you pair them together. You can provide liquidity that way. With their weighted pools, you can have as many as up to 8 tokens. So they've got a very different architecture of how these pools are made.
Yeah. So basically, you're making a pool, like we just said. Usually, the pool is 2 tokens, and it's 50% of each equally. Yep. With this product, with BeethovenX and Balancer, actually, because it's a clone of Balancer, you can define a completely new pool with up to eight different tokens, and you can specify the percentage mix of each. So you might have 10% of this one, 25% of that one, 38.3% of this one, whatever it is you want to come up with, right? As long as it adds up to 100.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the, if you look at sort of the Uniswap model of automated market makers or decentralized exchanges, it's that, it's the 2-pair system. It's basically what it comes down to. Beethoven, the Balancer V2 AMM is just so flexible. I mean, there's so much that you can do with it. And before anybody on Fantom had, like when you provide liquidity, you get back an APR, usually in the native token of the protocol or, whatever you're staking on. But they were one of the first ones to deploy multi-contract rewarders, and they don't even really make a peep about it. Like now you can get Beats tokens, you can get up to 3 different tokens paid back in APR on their LPs, and like no one really even made a big deal about that. But
I didn't even know that. Okay, so just to unpack that. So if you provide liquidity to Uniswap, and 50/50 tokens, you get paid. You basically get transaction fees, and those transaction fees are, I believe, just in the 2 tokens, right? So it's it's half Tether, half Wi-Fi, whatever it is. And you're saying that with BeethovenX, you can get paid in all 8 tokens or different tokens. Is that correct?
So different tokens. So you wouldn't get paid necessarily the tokens in the pool. It's really whoever's incentivizing that pool. So let's say Alchemix comes over from Ethereum and builds on Beethoven, then they could partner up and say, we're going to put USDC, the Alchemix token, and the Beats token as rewards for this pool. So they've got multi-rewarder contracts, which is a pretty big deal. I mean, if you think about it, like the big problem in DeFi is, and the unanswered question is, what happens when these token emissions stop? Right? What happens when your native protocol's token emissions cease? Like, what do you do then? And so that's, we're going to get there in like 2026 for a lot of these protocols. And so, there's a couple things that I think are super fascinating. One of which is you need to have other token options to give out as APR, right? So you have to have these multi-rewarder contracts to continue this flywheel of, incentivization to provide liquidity. So they've really mastered that. It's pretty, they've done an incredible job. And this concept of boosted pools, which it's fascinating, and they actually did it before Balancer even deployed it because of the fact that Fantom's so cheap and they can really experiment and do all these different things. But what people don't, what I didn't realize, and I doubt maybe other people do as well, is if there's $1 million in liquidity pool, on a daily basis, only about 10% of that liquidity is actually used for swaps. So like trading in and out of the token pair. So Fantom USDC, only about 10% of that is used, right? So that means there's 90% of this dormant liquidity on the other side, sitting in the farm that's not actually really doing anything for you as a liquidity provider or for the exchange besides adding depth to the exchange and making sure that trading is efficient. But where I'm going with this is, what they realize is that they can actually take that other 90% that's not being used on a daily basis, send it off to an auto compounder like a Yearn or a Reaper, and make passive APR on that additional 90% that's not actually being used for swaps. So now they're taking liquidity, sending it off to another vault, and basically you get another line item on your on your payback for providing liquidity that's APR from just a passive source. So if you think about the long-term liquidity strategy of these DEXs, once token emissions end, that's a pretty powerful one. You can send off your liquidity and make APR on it, in places like Yearn.
Yeah, so they're so BeethovenX is like, in some dimensions, they're a liquidity efficiency master, right?
Yes.
So they're just basically squeezing every bit of value out of the liquidity you provide them by just being cleverer and cleverer about how they structure things and how they actually deploy that. So it's super cool. That's actually super impressive. I didn't know like half of that, so thank you for that.
Yeah,
so,
of course.
Okay, so we could go on for a long time.
Yeah, we could talk through like 20 protocols.
Yeah, I know. So which I'm sort of tempted to do, but I also want to get to the headline and the meat of the discussion, right? So we're roughly halfway through here. So
sure.
So let's shift gears. 2022 has been a terrible year for Fantom. I mean, it's been terrible for everybody, but it's been sort of weirdly black swan on top of black swan in Fantom, on top of the recession and the Terra Luna and 3AC collapse. So the year started off, we were all very hopeful, and we had solidly deployed by Andre Cronje himself. Hi, the great Andre, right? And so we all love Andre, I think even still, and we all had high hopes. Solidly being basically a curve clone with a bunch of new ideas built into it. To make a better curve on Fantom. So imagine that. So Curve is a very popular, I won't get into what Curve is, but basically it's sort of the core hub of DeFi on Ethereum. And Andre was basically building the same thing, but with some clever new ideas in it for Fantom. And Curve on Fantom, given the efficiencies of Fantom itself and the subsecond, sub-penny transactions on Fantom, that should have been a monster. So we all had very high hopes. And there was apparently a vulnerability in Solidly, which was taken advantage of, and the whole thing basically collapsed and did not work as planned. And there was even some, and I'm trying to remember whether that caused the Roosh cascading liquidation event that many people thought was going to brick Fantom and actually just totally kill the chain, right?
Yeah.
So do you remember that? You take us through the Roosh liquidation scare thing.
Yeah. So do you want to start on Solidly, or do you want to start on the liquidations?
Let's back up to Solidly. So give me your thoughts on Solidly, and then we'll go to the Roosh thing.
Sure. Yeah. So I mean, if you look at Ethereum and Curve, I mean, it's a monster, right? Like it's a stable swap AMMs. It's the most effective place to trade in between stable coins. You could argue stablecoins are really the backbone of this ecosystem, right? Like we wouldn't really be here without stablecoins. So it's it's arguably one of the most important platforms in the space. And when you bring stablecoins to the game, then you can bring massive TVL, and that was really the promise of Solidly, right? Like I think at its height it had 2.69 billion in like 3 weeks of TVL. That came probably for a lot of reasons, some of which were not so good, but there was massive yield farming opportunities at launch, and hindsight's 2020, and so I think if Andre could do it again, I certainly can't speak for him, but I think there were a lot of things that I don't think that he or the team knew were going to happen the way that they did, and so just to kind of set the stage, so this concept was like VE33, so effectively like getting voting power was in an NFT, and Andre said the top 20 protocols on Fantom are going to, they're going to get these NFTs, and you're going to have a certain amount of voting power for Solidly emissions. So that, the emissions of the protocol, what goes to the pools, and you can vote on the different pools, fine. But the problem was that for these airdropped NFTs, they basically came at with all the voting power at zero cost. And so the protocols themselves were sort of unaligned with the goals of Solidly, which is, like it was supposed to be about, driving fees to the most active pools. And in reality, what happened was you have all these people that now have massive voting power that are voting for their own like pools to get emissions out of it. So one of the problems was there was no whitelisting of LPs. So you could just set up an LP on there, a liquidity pair. And it wasn't whitelisted. And if you look at what Velodrome's done on Optimism, that was one of the biggest things they changed is you can't just launch an LP because you could game the system, right? So, so basically, people were deploying trading pairs where the pair was owned by the creator, so like it was their tokens. They would then vote for their own pairs, and then they would
voted for themselves.
Yeah, and then just sell the emissions and take the profit. And so it was completely misaligned with what you were trying to do. So effectively, that was part of the reason that it failed. And so there was a whole bunch of other holes, but it really opened the door to a massive, it was front loaded. The emissions were front loaded too heavy. It just created this gold rush where everybody was just farming and dumping the token. And there was obviously the technical issues as well. So. It was it didn't go as planned, and it was a massive TVL loss, because that was really the height of Fantom. Like when that was raging, like February, March, that was that was probably the best time as far as the the chain's optics were. So
yeah, it really did look like possibly it could become the primary DeFi chain if they'd gotten that right. It might have attracted the bulk of DeFi activity, even off of Ethereum and other chains, onto Fantom, especially if all the liquidity for stable coins concentrated itself on Fantom. That would have dragged everything else along with it. I agree with you. And given Fantom's other advantages, that could have been insanely massive. So Solidly basically had a design flaw it could not come back from. That was Black Swan number one, and then Andre kind of ran away, right? Because I think he just, he gets stressed out having to deal with the people. I understand. I get it. I don't really fault him totally for it. But you have to deal with a bunch of people screaming at you in Telegram and on Twitter continuously. You tend to not want to engage, right? Especially after something like this, where people did lose a lot of money. So
yeah, right? I mean, I think the actions of some of the games that were played, I think left a really sour taste in his mouth. Like he built this thing for the betterment of Fantom, and everybody kind of knew what the end goal was, but to game the system for monetary reward, which is kind of human nature. I think.
Well, of course, he had to have known. I mean, look, in DeFi, they don't call them degens for nothing, right? So they will rally to wherever money is flowing to them, right? And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's just called capitalism and a free market, right? I don't think that's evil in some way. So, it is a bummer. I mean, it's a bummer it didn't work out. I know Andre was, he likes to. It's art for him to build something, and I know it just when the art failed, it like hurt his heart. You know what I mean? So I totally get that. So okay.
And it was wrapped up in the Danny mess as well, right? We can't forget that. He was along for the ride.
Mess. Yeah. Yep. So So I'll do the quick and dirty on that.
Sure.
So Daniele Sestigali, otherwise known as Danny, was the major guy behind Wonderland in Time, and I won't get into the details of that, but they basically, well, I'll get into this far. They hired a felon. They didn't realize they hired a felon. The felon was in charge of billions of dollars. Danny found out and then proceeded to not tell all of us, which was really worse than everything else that had gone before. And of course we found out because the shit always comes out. And once we did, everybody hated Danny, and Wonderland basically collapsed. Although weirdly, the worst, you could get out of Wonderland in time at approximately 50% of its all-time high. So as far as disasters go, not the worst disaster in the end, but it took a while to get there, right? So, yep. But nonetheless, Danny was basically sort of discredited, tarred and feathered and run out of town on a rail at the exact moment, like literally about 2 or 3 weeks after he had done a deal with Andre to work together with him on Solidly, and to the point where Andre had a picture in his Twitter, the little banner across the top there of a cartoon version of himself and Danny, sort of shaking hands side by side, yep. Marvel and DC team up is coming kind of vibe. And lo and behold, the Marvel and DC both sort of, Danny sort of got dragged down, and then after Solidly didn't work, Andre kind of got dragged down, which, it sort of, the contagion sort of caught to Fantom, and the Black Swan vibe was just all over the place, and it was not good for anybody.
Yeah,
so,
I mean, I think we can't underestimate the power of Frog Nation, of what was Danny's Frog Nation back then. I mean, it was a huge, it had a massive following, and it really brought a ton of users. And when that unraveled, it, people obviously just probably scattered to other chains, and we lost a lot of sort of unique community in that event. But the unraveling of Solidly, to your earlier point, was probably the start of the cascading price demise, and then what later went into the liquidation events that you referenced earlier. So that was probably the kickoff.
Yeah. So the cascading liquidations happen when the people are leveraged to the hilt, and then the price starts dropping for whatever reason. Exterior Solidly fails, all of the above, which was kind of the case here, and so the price of Fantom keeps dropping, and then people who are leveraged, suddenly their loans get below their collateralization ratio. They're liquidated. Their Fantom has to be sold, which causes the price of Fantom to drop further, which then hits the next people down, and so on and so forth. And the wheel of shitstorm just rolls and keeps rolling with almost nothing to stop it. Now there's a guy named Roosh, and this fucking Roosh guy. So Roosh is like this big sort of multi-millionaire guy, and he was leveraged to Kingdom Come on Fantom, right? And so when all this started happening, like Roosh got hit kind of harder than everybody because he was leveraged, had the most in, and leveraged the most. And he was so much in that there was a fear that started circulating that Fantom, there wasn't actually enough Fantom to liquidate him, right? I think that was the fear, right? Or at least it wasn't enough Fantom and Aave specifically to cover his. Right? I think
it was in Scream, actually.
Yes, it was in Scream. That's right. Scream, which is a clone of Aave. So yeah, you are absolutely right. So we were all terrified. I mean, even I was kind of like trying to figure out whether, if there's not enough Fantom to cover, to liquidate, what happens? Does the chain brick? And I sort of conclude the chain would not brick, which ended up being correct, but I wasn't totally positive. What were you thinking when this was going on?
I mean, I don't know about you, but I was actually watching the various wallets to kind of see what the health ratio was and understand kind of how much damage could be done at any given time. But I think we saw it was between 40 and 50 million, US dollar equivalent of Fantom that was liquidated on chain. Couple that with also, I think Harry Ye from Tomb had like $20 million of Tomb that was liquidated. Also on chain around the same time, which I think led to the Tomb depeg. We don't probably need to get into that, but I think those were correlated events. But yeah, I mean, look, it was frightening, right? I mean, nobody, no one knew if there was enough liquidity to cover the liquidations, and like with all of these, these liquidation bots running crazy. I mean, the transactions per second, the entire network was definitely slowed down, but it handled it pretty well. I mean, for this to happen on chain on a on like not in a centralized exchange, it was pretty good.
I have to say, in retrospect, now that it's done, right, and now that we're not worrying about it, this actually was a moment where Fantom showed its quality, and the fact that this worked under such huge duress in the end was a huge positive. The fact that it unwound in an orderly fashion, despite all the chaos, everything worked as advertised. And that actually is pretty extraordinary and speaks very well to DeFi in general, I think. It ended up being a strength after all was said and done, which we didn't really know while it was going down. And now the destruction test has been run, and now we know, right? So,
yeah. I mean, it speaks volume to the Fantom technology. That's for certain. And I think the other thing that people don't really talk about as much is like, in some ways, those type of liquidation events, like getting that much dollar, that amount of dollar volume out of the hands of some whales and sort of redistributing that out and not being so centralized with these massive holders is not always a bad thing either. So like in some ways, it could, it's got some silver lining, I think.
Yep, totally agree. Okay, let's shift gears and let's get to the last part of our discussion today. So there's been sort of a criticism that Fantom lacks biz dev and marketing, right? So I have a friend, Shir Lazar, who recently was tapped by Avalanche to go and be the MC of the Avalanche conference out in Lisbon. This was like maybe, I think, 3 or 4 months ago. And she didn't really know much about it. She came back all hyped up. She's like, oh my God, I feel like, Avalanche is Google in the early days. That was like the vibe. And for her to say something like that is actually significant. Shira, seen a lot, knows a lot of people. She was very impressed. And of course, just recently over the last few weeks, we've seen Polygon announcing partnerships, an investment from Sequoia, India. They've announced partnerships with Disney, Meta, formerly Facebook. I mean, it's just like 10 gold star
the NFL
partners. The NFL, right? I mean, I'm not even getting into half of them, but they're all just like gargantuan, right? So I don't even know how they're doing it because whoever the biz dev people or person is at Polygon, they are a genius. There's no question about it. Because in terms of tech and in terms of kind of everything else, I mean, I don't want to bag on Polygon too much, but they're not nearly as interesting as Avalanche and Fantom. And yet they were able to do all these biz dev deals, and get the investment from Sequoia, which is just incredible. So, question for you. Well, first of all, you wrote a thread on the state of Fantom, which ended up being very hopeful, and you felt pretty encouraged about what you're seeing. And I'll put a link to that thread in the show notes on YouTube. So first of all, is Fantom fucking up on their biz dev and marketing? Do they just have nobody? Is that impression correct or not?
So I think that on its face, it's certainly not as strong and as powerful as what we see from Polygon, or as buttoned up as what I've seen. I've spoken to the Avalanche team that specifically handles DeFi, and they've got like 5 or 6 people only for DeFi. And they've got an NFT team. They've got a whole like army of BD folks that go out and create partnerships, do these deals, make sure that all the protocols are taken care of. So, like, if you want to win in this space, I think you have to have something, a model like that. Like, you have to go back to.
Are they putting money? Avalanche is putting money into their protocols, right? So they're not just doing deals; they're giving money away, or doing investment. I should probably say, right?
Yeah.
So they're being venture capitalists for their ecosystem.
Yep. And exactly. So I mean, I don't know if we'll get into sort of the grants program and that stuff, but they have a strong grants program, and Fantoms is going to come back, and we can talk through that. And that's so important, right? I mean, you have Fantom has, the foundation has, as told by Simone, has 10 years of runway, so they've got a massive treasury, which means they've got they're sitting on a bucket of cash that they could incentivize people to build. And if you look at the chains that are doing really well right now, look at Optimism. They're incentivizing the heck out of people to come build on Optimism, and they've got a really robust grants program there. So on the thread that I wrote, we've been very critical of the foundation's efforts in business development, in lack of venture capitalists, in the marketing department. I mean, we really don't hold back, I don't think, too much on actually trying to give critiques, like constructively give feedback on what's going on, but. It was the first time I had heard. So there's a AMA with Maple Blocks Capital, which is a venture capitalist firm that's now partnering with the Fantom Foundation to help fund protocols that want to build on Fantom. So you've got some VCs, and the initiative is called the Ecosystem Support Partner Initiative, and so basically it's going to be 6 VCs that are part of this thing, where people can get introduced to the venture capitalists, so because they can basically go find some money if they need to build, and so it was an AMA with them. But I was very encouraged because this is the first time I had heard Sam, who runs BD at Fantom Foundation, acknowledge Polygon's efforts. He was like, "We see what they're doing. Getting in with these Web 2 companies is how you get eyeballs from retail. It's how you get to the masses, right?" And I certainly agree with that. And so, the TLDR was, he basically said that now they're going to use their VCs, through Fantom to get to Web 2 projects. They're going to reinstill the grants program and have 3 different facets for protocols to get, monetary support from the foundation. And they're going to be doing things like technical support. I know SpiritSwap V2, which is a decentralized exchange on Fantom called SpiritSwap, is being released. Their V2. Like, the foundation actually helped look through the code and make sure that everything was good. So technical support. So they're doing a lot of things to change their sort of operating strategies. But I think the most important one has to be business development. You have to hire aggressively and have a massive team, because that's all the competitors are doing that.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I have to say, I've spoken several times now with Simone Pomposi, who I believe is Chief Marketing Officer at Fantom. He's not the problem. That dude is great. That guy understands what's going on. I'm not sure why there is a problem, but it's not him. It feels like he's got a choke collar on him, and they just won't let him off the leash. That's my impression. So I have no idea whether that's true or not, but that's what it feels like to me. So that dude is gold, I think, and I think he understands the problem. So when we're talking these things, we're not talking about Simone. So just be clear.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think Simone's fantastic. He's awesome. There's such a rigorous focus on tech development. I was going to write a second iteration of this thread, which is why I now understand why there's such a rigorous focus on tech. But you can't be myopic. You cannot solely focus on tech and then forego biz dev or marketing or all the other elements that actually bring people to the chain. And I think for a long time that myopic focus of tech first has been sort of the perspective of the foundation. But I was very encouraged from that AMA, which I went in with very low expectations, not thinking it was going to be sort of a tell-all of a next strategy for the foundation. But it really, if they hold true to what they said, which is starting to bring in Web 2 companies and show the NFL or similar why Fantom is the place to build, then I think that they can be in a really good spot. But they have to deliver on that.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And look, the tech first thing, that's the path that leads to becoming the Amiga, the Betamax. That path leads to death.
Yeah.
Right. Even if you're the best tech, right? Yep. So history has been very, very, very clear. If you're a developer, which I am an engineer by training, so I once thought this. Marketing is bullshit. It's not bullshit. You absolutely must market, and especially in the Web3 world, I think it's actually things move so much faster that the need for marketing is actually much greater, and you have to do it at sort of faster speed, faster and broader. So I think it's actually more important than it's ever been in history. You don't have the time. You don't have the time to waste, because somebody like Polygon that's got kind of shittier tech but genius biz dev will just eat your lunch. Just take everything away from you, and your great tech will be there, but no one will care because no one will be using it.
Yeah,
so
if nobody's building on your chain, that's a big problem, right? And that's not the case. I wouldn't say that's the case yet, but you run the risk of falling into that space where retail doesn't care about your chain because they don't care about the tech. As long as it works, then most of retail retailers sitting on centralized exchanges, and they just read these press releases about partnerships with the NFL, and they go buy the Matic token, and that's driving price appreciation. Look at Matic performance over the last 30 days. It's been incredible.
It's been insane.
Yeah. And all driven by business development efforts. And so, I think that it seems like they've realized that, yes, the tech narrative is important, but it's not the winning narrative. It might be the winning in game, but it's not the winning narrative. And so I'm hopeful and excited that they'll scale out the BD team and continue to grow. I saw Michael Kong in Austin and at the Consensus
Michael Kong
conference.
is the CEO of Fantom, just to be so go ahead. Sorry,
Yeah,
go ahead.
sorry.
Just want to make sure that was clear. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I saw Mike at dinner and was able to speak to him about it, and he talked to me about building out a more robust biz dev team and having multiple people be on it, and so obviously that makes perfect sense. So so I'm optimistic and hopeful that that's going to be the case.
Well, my fingers are crossed. I love Fantom, but it's this first half of this year was it did not inspire confidence, right? So I'm hoping for quarters 3 and 4 to start inspiring some confidence and start getting back up off the mat. Okay, so with that in mind, let's move on to our last piece of information here, and this is the great hope of Fantom, and it is a tech-based hope, but I actually think a pretty good one. And that is the Fantom virtual machine, the FVM. So as part of rewriting Ethereum from scratch, the one piece they didn't rewrite, I think, was the virtual machine, which smart contracts execute on. But that is a big bottleneck. And if you can rewrite that to be more efficient, you can actually gain insane scalability and faster throughput of transactions per second. So if Ethereum right now is targeting, hasn't yet achieved targeting, post full merge, splurge, quurge, whatever, 100,000 transactions per second. Solana today is doing 50,000, and some people argue that that's bullshit because that's on a testnet or whatever. So whatever, let's just say it's 50,000. Fantom FBM, once that's in play, they think it's going to get 300,000 transactions per second, which is a very significant improvement over both of those guys. So tell me what you know about the FVM and when do we expect it?
Yeah, so I think we got to set the stage a little bit more even. So if you look at sort of you referenced it, so all layer ones that are EVM compatible suffer from the same problem, which is the bottlenecks of the EVM. And so what people what chain creators realize is that you could fork the Go implementation of Ethereum known as GF and basically make your blockchain EVM compatible. Well, what has that led to? Now there's 68. I looked today. I think there's over 68 either layer 1 or layer 2 blockchains that are EVM compatible. That's a lot. Like that's a ton. And so how could any of them or all of them, even in a multi-chain world, solve the actual problems of the EVM, right? So I guess what I'm saying is it's a crowded space with the same playbook being repeated over and over that nobody's really solving the problems of the actual Ethereum virtual machine. So that that lends itself to kind of what Fantom is now has been always envisioning in the Fantom virtual machine. So they just released a study. So they're doing a lot of testing on Fantom right now to kind of like get to the next steps of the Fantom virtual machine. But basically, there's something called StateDB, which is a proof of work algorithm. So it's part of the consensus layer, and then so StateDB and the EVM use up 99% of block processing time in like roughly equal portions, right? So they've figured out, okay, this is taking up 46% of the processing time. This is taking up 40. Bad math, but you get what I'm saying. So we need to solve that, and so basically what they're doing moving forward is looking at modifying the proof of work algorithm into something called PebbleDB, which will be an advancement from StateDB, and then moving on from the Ethereum virtual machine to the Fantom virtual machine, and that's going to take some time because it's not just a product. You don't just snap your fingers and release it. It's all these iterations to the bottleneck issues that are part of the EVM. So you have to basically figure out what the problems are and then systematically start to knock them out one by one. And like things like SnapSync were like one example of a tech release that they did that increased the gas per second on the chain, and gas fees went way down. It's little things like that make
incremental improvements as opposed to one giant release.
Exactly.
So when I say when do we expect the FVM, the answer is we're going to get it in bite-sized chunks over a period of time. So is that period of time a year? Is that period of time 3 years, like Ethereum's been? Like, do we have any sense of that, or is that still sort of up in the air?
To me, it seems up in the air. I mean, I think that I've heard people say 2024. I don't know. I think that I think 2 years could be realistic. So let's look at what they did to staff for this thing. I think is probably a good place to start.
Yeah.
So Fantom Foundation went out and hired a new chief research officer. His name is Dr. Bernhard Scholz. And Professor Scholes he was a faculty member at the University of Sydney. He specializes in programming languages, and he created a software called Souffle, I believe. And basically, it's a language for static program analysis for like JavaScript. It's used by like Amazon and Oracle. Like this he's the real deal. And so they hired him, and now he's got a team under him of researchers and developers that are building an entirely new middleware stack. So expanding on that state DB that I referenced, and also focus on building the Fantom virtual machine. So they're now aggressively hiring, and letting this guy kind of run lead in the development of the FEM. So I had the opportunity to watch an interview with him with Michael Kong, who's the CEO, and I was super impressed. I mean, the guy's, he's very, very smart and super heavy tech. So,
got it. Well, my hope is that I'm always scared by professors, even though they are smart, because they tend to be like, well, I need to prove this thing and write white papers forever, and 2024 is good enough. However, the main battle for all these chains may very well be in 2023, right? And Polygon just released, and this was a surprise, the ZK EVM. So Polygon just released their own EVM, and I don't know if it's any good, but theirs is out. Right, and they're Polygon, right? So I read that and I was like, well, shit. And then Celestia is, they're going to launch their chain, which is, hyper horizontal. Who knows whether it'll work or not? But if it does, it could achieve sort of crazy speeds also, and that's going to be in early 2023. The Ethereum merge will be done in less than a year, I think. Whether it works or not, it's a whole other thing. But I think the clock is ticking. So. Again, I love Fantom, and I've been a very big fan for several years now. So I'm really hopeful that they can kind of pull all this shit together, all these strings. So fingers are crossed. Like
I listened to actually on that AMA with Maple Blocks and Michael Kong. He referenced the Polygon. I think it's the ZK Snarks EVM that they built, and I believe he said that they're still limited by the underlying performance of the Ethereum. The EVM Ethereum has to use, because it's a layer 2 sitting on top of a layer 1. So there are apparently there are some limitations there. It's not just like a fix all unless the EVM itself gets fixed. So there's still bottlenecks that happen in the process. So but that was something that stood out to me in that conversation. So look, I don't want to put an exact timeline on. Like I don't know. We would need to ask Mike or the foundation. So it might be 2023. I don't exactly know, but that would be something that we would want to probably ask them. But I mean, look, at the end of the day, like, this is something that can allow Fantom to win long term. Like if you solve this problem and you advance on the EVM and you actually achieve vertical scaling without sacrificing security, I mean, that's a really, really strong, proposition to be in, and for a chain to have. So, you look at things like Didex, the perpetual trading platform that was on Ethereum. They got massive adoption on Ethereum. They literally had to leave Ethereum because they couldn't do what they needed to do because it was too slow, and so they had to scale horizontally and build out their own chain on Cosmos, and that just opens up a whole other world of things that they have to focus on. It takes them off Ethereum. It's bad for Ethereum. So, if Fantom can solve that, I think the idea is that vertical scaling on Fantom will mean that Didex doesn't need to go anywhere else, and that's really that's the end game.
I think it's entirely possible. I mean, I've been delighted with my experience on Fantom, for a couple of years now. So, I get it. It is possible. So last question before we go, knowing everything that and knowing that, nobody has really claimed the Iron Throne yet of the settlement layer, the layer 1 to end all layer 1s. There's probably going to be one layer 1 that has 85% of the market, and the other 15% will be kind of a mishmash of everyone else. Is the way usually markets go. So assuming this follows the same pattern, I think sooner or later, either Ethereum will get it, or Ethereum will end up being the MySpace, and somebody else will get it. That could be Solana, that could be Near, or it could be Fantom. So knowing that the Iron Throne is still open, can Fantom win? Can Fantom still be the winner?
I mean, I certainly think so. I mean, I guess the question is like, will it end up that way? Will it end up that 85%, that the winner has 85% of market share? I don't know. But the FEM, like actually achieving the Fantom virtual machine is absolutely pivotal for them to be the winner, because otherwise everyone's going to be on somewhat of a similar playing field pretty soon. Like when Ethereum finishes the merge, purge, whatever all the words are, like, then what do you do if you're not advancing past that? I mean, I think, one thing what's interesting about, about sort of what's happening on the Ethereum side is, like, in some ways, Fantom, and Michael Kong referenced this as well during that podcast, is Fantom's, a step ahead of Ethereum because they're focused on improving the virtual machine and pushing out the FEM, whereas, Ethereum's is focused on, basically the transition to proof of work right now, and that's already the case on Fantom. So, so right. there's like as far as timing and just the current setup of the chain, like I think it's in a pretty advantageous position. They just have to pull it off. And by the way, you can't discredit BD. You have to go out and get
you do
Web 2 huge projects onto Fantom and continue to drive hype and excitement about the chain itself, because a lot of that died when the Solidly stuff happened, when the liquidations events happened. A lot of people were turned off, and you have to get those people back. And so you can win the large game with the FEM, but I think you have to win the subsequent small game of getting excitement back to the chain.
Totally agree. Well, Clay, we're kind of out of time here. I want to thank you so much for coming on short notice, and your insights and your knowledge of the Fantom ecosystem are invaluable. So I was really happy to get you on the show. So thanks once again.
Of course. Thank you, man.
That's it. My name is Mark Jeffrey. This has been Hash Rate. We'll see you next time.